The Galactic Council chamber stretched across half a kilometer of polished crystalline floor, where representatives from 47 different species gathered for what they believed would be another routine session. Ambassador Kyle Matthews stood at the central podium, his simple gray suit a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and ornamental armor worn by the alien dignitaries surrounding him. His face showed no emotion, but those who knew humans well enough could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of something heavy pressing down on his shoulders. The United Terran Assembly is formally withdrawing from Galactic Council space, Kyle announced, his voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. Effective immediately, all human colonies, stations and outposts will be evacuated. We estimate completion within 72 hours. The chamber erupted into chaos. Chairman Velos, a massive reptilian whose species had ruled their home system for 10,000 years, rose from his seat. His scales rippled with colors that signaled confusion and irritation. Ambassador Matthews, this is absurd. Humanity has been a cornerstone of this council for 200 years. You've mediated our disputes, shared your technology freely, helped us avoid 3 major wars. What possible reason could you have for this sudden departure? Kyle pulled up a holographic display showing deep space sensor readings, astronomical data that made several of the scientific advisors lean forward with interest. We've detected critical anomalies in multiple sectors. Quantum fluctuations, dimensional instabilities, radiation signatures that shouldn't exist according to current physics models. These anomalies are accelerating at an exponential rate. We strongly recommend immediate evacuation of all Council species to safer regions of space. Councillor Trin of the Valkyrie, a species known for their aggressive expansion policies, made a dismissive gesture with her 4 arms. Anomalies? Humanity has always been cautious to the point of cowardice. You see danger in every shadow, threat in every unknown. This is exactly why the Council voted last month to open the quarantine zones for resource extraction. Those sectors contain enough dark matter crystals to power our civilizations for 1,000 years, and you've kept them locked away with your paranoid restrictions for decades. Those restrictions exist for a reason, Kyle said quietly, but there was an edge to his voice that made a few of the more perceptive aliens pause. A very specific, very dangerous reason that we've tried repeatedly to explain. And we've listened to your explanations, Chairman Velos replied, his tone patronizing in the way that powerful beings often speak to those they consider overly worried. We've reviewed your data. Our own scientists found nothing that justifies the level of alarm you continue to express. The Council's decision is final. The quarantine zones will be opened and development will proceed. Through the massive transparent dome above the chamber, the assembled dignitaries could see something that made several of them point and murmur among themselves. Massive ships were descending through the atmosphere toward the human district of the Council's capital world. These weren't normal transport vessels. They were arc ships, enormous beyond anything the Council knew humans possessed. Their hulls were marked with symbols that seemed to shift and change when looked at directly, geometric patterns that predated any known written language. What are those? Trin demanded, her tone sharp with suspicion. Evacuation vessels, Kyle answered simply. We've been building them for 30 years, ever since it became clear the Council wouldn't heed our warnings. Each one can carry an entire colony, complete with its infrastructure, genetic banks and cultural archives. A junior counselor from the Prian delegation spoke up, his voice uncertain. 30 years? You've been planning to leave us for 3 decades. We've been planning for the possibility that you would force us to choose between your politics and our survival, Kyle corrected. We hoped it wouldn't come to this. We genuinely hoped you would listen, that you would trust our experience and our research. But hope isn't a strategy, and we learned long ago that we can't protect people who refuse to be protected. The holographic display shifted, showing real-time footage from human colonies across Council space. The scenes were eerily similar everywhere. Humans moving with calm efficiency, loading personal belongings, family heirlooms, and critical equipment onto transport shuttles. There was no panic, no chaos. Everything moved like a well-rehearsed dance, because that's exactly what it was. Every human civilian had been trained for this scenario, had run drills annually, knew exactly where to go and what to bring when the evacuation order came. In the capital city visible through the dome, entire human neighborhoods were being systematically emptied. The ARC ships used some kind of gravitational technology to simply lift buildings intact into their cargo holds. Parks, schools, medical facilities, even the trees and gardens, all being carefully preserved and packed away. The humans weren't abandoning their lives, they were taking everything with them. This is insanity, Velos said, but there was uncertainty creeping into his voice now. Where will you go? Council space represents the most developed, most protected region of the galaxy. Beyond our borders there's nothing but frontier worlds and unexplored sectors. Kyle smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. Chairman, humanity explored this galaxy for a century before we even made first contact with your species. Did you really think we showed you everything we found? We have locations prepared. Safe locations. Places where the barriers between dimensions are strong, where the anomalies can't reach. We've been quietly developing these sites for decades, building infrastructure, establishing sustainable ecosystems. Everything we need is already there waiting for us. Barriers between dimensions? Trin scoffed. You're talking like reality itself is under threat. This is the kind of superstitious nonsense that holds back progress. Kyle placed a small data storage device on the conference table. It sat there, innocuous and ignored while he spoke. This contains everything. Full sensor logs, historical data from our encounters, technical specifications for the protective systems we've maintained, and coordinates for safe zones we've established. It also contains detailed instructions for recognizing the early warning signs of manifestation events and emergency protocols that might buy you time if you're willing to follow them. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives who had been his colleagues, some even his friends for years. I want to be very clear about something. We're not leaving because we're angry with you. We're not leaving to punish you or to make a political statement. We're leaving because we have families, children, futures we're responsible for protecting. And we cannot protect them here, not anymore, not with the barriers failing. Failing barriers to what? A counselor shouted from the back. Kyle was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made even the most dismissive council members feel a chill run through whatever anatomy they possessed. To something that makes war look like a children's game. To something that doesn't conquer or destroy but converts and assimilates. To something that most of you will meet in the next few months, and when you do, you'll understand exactly why humanity tried so hard to keep you away from it. He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent chamber. At the doorway he paused and looked back one final time. The data chip has everything you need to survive what's coming. Use it or don't. Believe us or don't. But know this, humanity offered you our protection for 2 centuries and you rejected it. We offered you our knowledge and you called it paranoia. We offered you our experience and you called it cowardice. We've done everything we could. Now you'll face the consequences of your choices, and we pray to whatever gods listen that you survive them. Then he was gone, leaving only the data chip on the table and a chamber full of aliens who suddenly felt very uncertain about their unanimous decision. 3 weeks had passed since the last human ship vanished from Council space, and junior scientist Melissa Harper was staring at sensor readings that made absolutely no sense. She had been raised by human parents after her biological family died in a stellar disaster when she was just an infant. The Harpers had given her everything: a home, an education, and most importantly, the human way of thinking that emphasized careful observation and healthy skepticism. Right now, that human training was screaming at her that something was very wrong. The background radiation in Sector 447 had jumped 43% in just 3 weeks. That kind of increase didn't happen naturally. It couldn't happen naturally. Yet her instruments were clear, and she had triple-checked every calibration. The readings were accurate, which meant the universe itself was doing something impossible. She pulled up the old human restriction maps, the ones the Council had voted to ignore. Sector 447 had been humanity's most heavily restricted zone, marked with warning beacons and patrolled by human defense vessels for decades. Now the Thronix conglomerate had 5 mining operations running there, pulling out dark matter crystals worth billions of credits per shipment. Her supervisor, Director Kren, barely looked up when she brought him the data. You're wasting time on human paranoia. Those restrictions were always political, not scientific. Focus on your assigned projects. But Melissa couldn't let it go. It was that human stubbornness her adoptive father always joked about, that refusal to ignore a problem just because acknowledging it was inconvenient. She ran unauthorized scans of the other former quarantine zones during her off hours, using her personal credentials and hoping nobody noticed. Every single zone showed the same pattern. Radiation increasing. Quantum fluctuations growing stronger. And something else, something her instruments couldn't properly classify. The readings reminded her of interference patterns, like someone was pressing against reality from the other side, creating ripples and distortions in the fabric of space itself. She was still analyzing the data when the emergency alert came through. Mining Station Delta 447 had gone silent. All communications dead. Automated systems offline. 73 workers with no explanation for their disappearance. The rescue team took 6 hours to reach the station, and Melissa monitored their communications the entire time. When they finally docked and entered the facility, their first reports made her blood run cold. "Station is intact," the team leader reported, his voice uncertain. "Life support running normally. Lights on. But nobody's here. It's like everyone just vanished in the middle of their daily routine." The security footage told a story that spread through council space like wildfire within hours. Melissa watched it 17 times, and each viewing made her more terrified than the last. The miners had been working normally, going about their tasks with the casual efficiency of experienced workers. Then, simultaneously, every single person on the station had stopped what they were doing. Not suddenly, not with alarm. They simply paused as if hearing something no one else could detect. Their expressions shifted from concentration to peaceful serenity, like they had just heard the most beautiful music in the universe. Then they turned. All of them, at the exact same moment, turned toward the outer walls of the station. And they walked. Calmly, methodically, with the steady pace of people who knew exactly where they were going and why. They walked to the nearest airlocks, entered the cycling chambers in small groups, and activated the outer doors. Without spacesuits. Without emergency gear. Without any survival equipment whatsoever. The external cameras showed them stepping into the vacuum of space, still walking, still wearing those serene expressions until the void took them. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came in the final seconds of footage, when the camera angle caught a glimpse of what lay beyond the airlock. Shapes. Not ships or asteroids or any physical object Melissa could identify. Shapes that existed wrong, that bent light in ways that made her eyes hurt when she tried to focus on them. Shapes that seemed to occupy more dimensions than the three-dimensional space they inhabited. And for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, those shapes moved toward the departing miners like a parent welcoming children home. "Shut down operations in Sector 447 immediately," Chairman Velos ordered during the emergency council session. "But the other mining zones are far enough away. They should be safe to continue operations." Melissa wanted to scream at him. The human data had shown that all the quarantine zones were connected somehow, that breaching one would eventually affect all the others. But she was a junior scientist and nobody was listening to warnings anymore. They didn't listen when Station Gamma 229 reported the same thing 4 days later. 82 workers from 6 different species, all walking peacefully into death. They didn't listen when a cargo hauler in Sector 338 was found drifting with its entire crew gone, the ship's logs showing only that the crew had heard something beautiful and couldn't refuse the call. By the end of the second week, 12 stations had been evacuated or abandoned. Hundreds of workers lost. And the pattern was spreading exactly the way the human restriction maps had predicted it would. Melissa spent 3 days hacking into the sealed human archives. It wasn't easy. Humans had encrypted their sensitive data with security protocols that would take council supercomputers decades to crack. But Melissa had been raised human. She knew how they thought, how they organized information, how they left backdoors for authorized access in case of emergencies. When she finally broke through, what she found made her understand why Kyle Matthews had looked so tired, so resigned during that final council meeting. The files were labeled, Dimensional Incursion Events, Historical Record. They contained 50 years of documented encounters with something the humans called, the Others. Sensor logs, incident reports, casualty lists, and detailed analysis of manifestation patterns. Humanity had lost their first deep space colony to these things. 4,000 people, gone in a single day. They lost 2 more colonies and a science vessel before they even understood what they were fighting. The reports described entities that existed partially outside normal spacetime, drawn to concentrated sapient consciousness like predators to prey. But they didn't hunt in the traditional sense. They converted. Assimilated. People who encountered them reported feeling overwhelming peace, described hearing voices promising an end to all suffering and struggle. And once someone answered that call, they were lost forever, joining something that wasn't quite a hive mind and wasn't quite individual consciousness. The humans had developed countermeasures. Reality anchors, they called them, devices that strengthened the barriers between dimensions. They had mapped every weak point in council space, established quarantine zones around each one, and maintained constant monitoring for signs of breakthrough. For 50 years, humanity had held the line. They had lost thousands of personnel keeping the barriers stable, and the council species had never even known they were in danger. Melissa found one file that made her hands shake so badly she nearly dropped her data pad. It was a maintenance log showing the reality anchors in Sector 447. The devices had required weekly power calibrations and monthly component replacements. The last human maintenance run had been performed 36 hours before the evacuation order, which meant the anchors had now gone without maintenance for 3 weeks. They were failing. And without them, the barriers between dimensions were collapsing. She ran to Chairman Veloz's office, not caring about protocol or proper channels. The data pad clutched in her trembling hands contained proof of everything, validation of every warning humanity had given. "We need to contact humanity," she said, her voice breaking. "Right now. Before this spreads any further. They know how to fix this. They have the technology, the experience, the knowledge we need." Veloz looked at her with something that might have been pity. "We've tried. Human space is completely dark. They encrypted their destination coordinates with codes our best analysts can't break. They scrubbed every navigational database before they left. It's like they vanished from the galaxy completely. Then we use their data," Melissa insisted. "The archives have instructions for maintaining the reality anchors. We can learn to operate them ourselves." "The Council's technical team reviewed those files," Veloz said heavily. "The technology is beyond our current understanding. It would take us years just to manufacture the components, let alone install and calibrate them properly. And we don't have years. According to your own data, we have weeks at most." Melissa sank into a chair, the full weight of the situation crushing down on her. Humanity had tried to warn them, had begged them to listen, had offered protection that the Council had rejected as unnecessary paranoia. And now, with the barriers failing and the others manifesting across multiple sectors, they were alone. "There's one more file," she whispered, pulling it up on her pad. "Labeled, Emergency Protocol, Final Option. The access restrictions say it should only be opened after barrier failure has occurred." Veloz leaned forward, his reptilian features tight with tension. "Open it." The file contained a recorded message from Kyle Matthews, made just days before humanity's departure. And as they watched it, both Melissa and Veloz realized that humanity hadn't abandoned them at all. They had been preparing for this exact moment, planning for a rescue mission that would cost human lives to save the species that had rejected their help. The message ended with coordinates and a countdown timer showing 67 hours remaining. "What happens when the timer reaches 0? Veloz asked. Melissa checked the attached files, her human-trained mind quickly parsing the technical data. Her eyes went wide with understanding and horror. Humanity sends a signal. A massive, powerful signal that will reach every Council world simultaneously. But the signal itself will act as a beacon, drawing the others directly toward its source." She looked up at Veloz, tears streaming down her face. "They're going to save us, even though it might cost them everything." The Council chamber felt different now, smaller somehow, as if the weight of their mistakes had compressed the very air around them. Chairman Veloz stared at the sealed human archive file on the central display. Its security protocols finally cracked after 2 Council technicians had suffered complete mental breakdowns trying to access it. Both were now in medical isolation, babbling about voices and static and something calling their names from places that shouldn't exist. The price of knowledge had never seemed so steep. "Play it," Veloz ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. The hologram flickered to life, showing a human woman in military uniform. Her name tag identified her as Colonel Rachel Morrison, and the timestamp marked the recording as 53 years old. She looked young in the image, maybe 30 years old, with determined eyes that held no hint of the horrors she was about to describe. "This is Colonel Morrison, Human Deep Space Reconnaissance. Mission Day 447, she began, her tone professional but strained. "We've made contact with something that shouldn't exist according to every physical law we understand. Our science team is calling them the others until we develop better terminology, but honestly, I don't think human language has words for what these things really are." The image shifted to show a spatial anomaly that made everyone watching feel physically ill. It was a tear in space that pulsed with colors that didn't belong in normal reality, shades that existed somewhere between visible light and something the brain simply refused to process. Around the edges, space itself seemed to blur and distort like reality was melting. "The others exist partially outside our dimension," Morrison continued. "They're drawn to sapient consciousness the way moths are drawn to flames. Large concentrations of thinking, feeling beings act like beacons to them. When they manifest fully in our space, they don't destroy in any conventional sense. They convert. They assimilate. People who come into contact with them report experiencing what they describe as ultimate peace, absolute contentment, an end to all struggle and pain." She paused, and her professional mask cracked just slightly. We lost the science vessel Pathfinder and 2 colony expeditions before we understood what was happening. Total casualties, 4,247 people. Men, women, children. All gone. Not dead, but lost to something we can't reach, can't fight, can't even properly understand. Ambassador Torin of the Valkyrie, who had mocked Kyle Matthews so dismissively during that final meeting, made us sound like a wounded animal. 4,000 people. And they never told us. They carried that burden alone. The recording jumped forward, showing Morrison years older now, with lines of exhaustion etched deep into her face. Year 12 of containment operations. We've successfully held the barrier at 19 identified weak points. The others test our defenses constantly, probing for any gap, any moment of weakness. We've lost the destroyer Franklin, the research station Haven, and forward outpost Gamma 7. Another 3,118 personnel. She looked directly into the camera with eyes that had seen too much. The Council species have no idea how close they've come to extinction. 3 times in the past decade, we've had containment breaches that required immediate response. 3 times we've thrown ships and lives at the problem until we could seal the barriers again. We've decided to classify all of this. The Council can't know. If they knew, panic would spread, and concentrated fear is exactly what draws the others. Better they think we're paranoid than face the truth they're not ready to handle. Another time jump. Morrison was elderly now, her hair completely gray, her uniform bearing medals and commendations that spoke of decades of service. Year 43. My final report before retirement. Humanity has maintained successful containment across all quarantine zones. Current total casualties since first contact, 12,817 personnel. We've lost 127 ships, 15 stations, and more good people than I can count. Her voice wavered slightly. The Council pushes harder every year to access the restricted sectors. They see resources and opportunity where we see graves and nightmares. I fear what will happen when politics finally override safety, when the Council votes to dismantle what we've built with blood and sacrifice. I fear we won't be able to protect them from themselves. The recording ended, leaving silence in the chamber that felt heavy enough to crush bone. Melissa broke the quiet, her voice raw with emotion. 12,000 people. Over 40 years, humanity lost 12,000 of their own, protecting us from something we didn't even know existed. And we thanked them by calling them paranoid cowards. Find them, Velos commanded, his composure cracking. I don't care what it costs. Track their ships, decode their navigation, hack their systems, do whatever is necessary. We need humanity's help, and we need it now. But humanity had vanished more completely than anyone thought possible. Every tracking system came up empty. Every communications channel silent. The humans had scrubbed their trail with the thoroughness of people who had planned this evacuation for decades. Meanwhile, the phenomenon was accelerating. Colony worlds on the edges of the former quarantine zones reported mass disappearances. Entire populations would wake up one morning and simply walk away from their cities, heading into wilderness or desert or ocean with that same peaceful expression the miners had worn. They walked until the environment killed them, and they died with smiles on their faces. A passenger liner carrying 8,000 beings from 12 different species was found drifting in space. The ship was intact, systems functioning perfectly, but every passenger and crew member was gone. The data logs showed only that they had heard something calling to them, something that promised peace beyond understanding, and they couldn't refuse. The last entry simply read, "It's beautiful. Why did we ever fear the dark?" Melissa discovered a final file in the human archives, one she had missed during her initial search. It was labeled, Emergency Protocol, Final Message to Council. Her hands trembled as she activated it. Kyle Matthews appeared, and this recording was recent, maybe days before humanity's departure. He looked exhausted, older than his years, carrying a burden that would have broken lesser beings. But his eyes held determination and something else, something that looked like compassion mixed with profound sadness. "If you're watching this, the barriers have completely failed and the others are manifesting openly in Council space," Kyle said. "I'm sorry. We tried everything we could to prevent this. We warned you, we begged you, we offered every piece of evidence we had. But you chose not to believe, and now you're facing the consequences of that choice." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "We're not abandoning you. I need you to understand that. Humanity doesn't abandon innocents, even when their leaders make catastrophically bad decisions. We've taken our people to regions where the barriers are still strong, where we can maintain the defenses needed to hold the others back. But we've also prepared something else. The display behind him showed star charts marking locations scattered across unexplored space. These are safe zones we've been developing in secret for 40 years. Worlds we've quietly terraformed, infrastructure we've built without council knowledge or oversight. They're ready to receive refugees. All of you, every council species, every civilian who wants to live. Kyle's voice softened. We're going to send a signal when the time is right. It will reach every council world simultaneously, providing coordinates and navigation data. But you need to understand something crucial. That signal will also act as a beacon. It will draw the others directly toward its source, toward humanity. We know this. We've accepted it. Because buying you time to evacuate is worth the risk to us. Torin made a choked sound. They're going to sacrifice themselves. They're going to draw those things away from us. No, Melissa said, studying the tactical data attached to the file. They're going to fight. Look at these fleet positions, these defensive installations. Humanity isn't running away to die. They're preparing to make a stand, to hold a line that will protect the safe zones while we evacuate. She pulled up more files, her human-trained mind quickly connecting pieces the council had missed. They've been building a military force in secret for decades. Ships we never knew existed, weapons designed specifically to fight dimensional incursions, technology so advanced it makes our best equipment look primitive. Velos stared at the data, realization dawning. They never stopped protecting us. Even after we expelled them from the council, even after we voted against every measure they proposed, they stayed close enough to help. They've been watching, waiting, preparing for the day we would need them. Because that's what humans do, Melissa whispered, tears streaming down her face. They see someone in danger and they help. Even when it costs them. Even when it's not appreciated. Even when the people they're protecting actively reject that protection. They help because it's the right thing to do. The countdown timer on Kyle's message showed 41 hours remaining. Send word to every council world, Velos ordered, his voice ringing with authority and desperation. Full evacuation order. Every ship, every transport, every vessel that can move. Tell them to prepare for immediate departure to the coordinates humanity is providing. Tell them to pack only what they can carry. Tell them their lives depend on moving fast. Will they listen? Torin asked quietly. Velos looked at the spreading manifestation reports, at the growing list of lost colonies and vanished populations. They'd better. Because humanity is offering us one last chance, and we don't deserve a second one. The signal came exactly when the countdown reached 0, slicing through subspace with a power and precision that made every communications officer in council space jump in their seats. It bypassed every security protocol, overrode every privacy setting, and appeared simultaneously on every screen, every display, every holographic projector across hundreds of worlds. A human face materialized, and Melissa recognized the uniform immediately from her studies of human military history. This wasn't a diplomatic envoy or a civilian administrator. This was a warrior, someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for exactly this moment. This is Admiral James Cooper of the Human Expeditionary Defense Force, the man said, his voice carrying absolute authority tempered with genuine concern. If you're receiving this transmission, your reality anchors have suffered catastrophic failure and the others have begun full manifestation in council space. What you're experiencing is not a virus, not a technological weapon, and not anything your current scientific models can explain. Behind Cooper, Melissa could see a massive military command center buzzing with controlled urgency. Hundreds of humans in uniform coordinated operations across wall-sized displays showing tactical maps, fleet positions, and sensor data that made her head spin trying to process it all. We are transmitting coordinates to 18 safe zones in neutral space, Cooper continued. These locations represent 40 years of secret terraforming, infrastructure development, and defensive preparation. You have 72 hours to evacuate all populations to these coordinates. After that window closes, we cannot guarantee safe passage through regions where the others have achieved full manifestation. The display behind him shifted to show the safe zone locations. They were scattered across regions of space the Council had dismissed as worthless, barren systems too far from trade routes or resource deposits to bother developing. Except humanity had been developing them all along, building entire worlds in secret while the Council focused on politics and profit. Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, Cooper said, leaning forward with an intensity that made every being watching feel the weight of his words. Do not attempt to fight the others with conventional weapons. They exist partially outside the dimensional framework your armaments are designed for. Kinetic weapons will pass through them harmlessly. Energy weapons will only create additional stress points in reality, making manifestation easier for them. Even nuclear weapons will simply tear larger holes in spacetime for them to exploit. The screen showed footage that made Melissa's stomach turn. Human warships engaging something that her eyes couldn't properly focus on. The shapes twisted through space in ways that violated every law of physics she had ever learned, moving in directions that shouldn't exist, occupying spaces that seemed too small to contain them. Do not look directly at manifestations for extended periods, Cooper warned. Observation creates connection. The longer you look, the stronger the link becomes, and the easier it is for them to call you. Do not listen if you hear your name spoken in empty corridors or quiet moments. Do not follow feelings of unexplained peace or serenity. These are symptoms of early conversion, signs that they've begun establishing contact with your consciousness. Chairman Velos activated the emergency broadcast channel, his voice shaking slightly. Admiral Cooper, we were wrong. Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. We need your help. Can humanity defend Council space? Cooper's expression softened just a fraction, revealing the compassion underneath his military bearing. Chairman Velos, we're not doing this because we're looking for apologies or gratitude. We're doing this because it's necessary. Because someone has to stand between the innocent and the dark, and humanity learned long ago that we can't wait for others to step up when lives are at stake. He gestured to someone off-screen, and the tactical display changed to show the human fleet mobilizing. Ships emerged from positions throughout Council space, dropping stealth fields that had kept them hidden for weeks. They had been there all along, watching, waiting, ready to respond the moment they were needed. We will establish defensive perimeters at the boundaries of each safe zone, Cooper explained. We will hold those lines and buy you time to evacuate. But I need you to understand something crucial. We will not sacrifice humanity's future for species that refuse to listen to reason. You have 72 hours. Use every second wisely. Counselor Trin's voice came through, barely controlled panic evident in her tone. What about our homeworlds? Our cultural centers? We have thousands of years of history, art, architecture that can't be moved. Cooper's expression remained firm but not unkind. Take what data you can digitize. Record what you can preserve. But understand this, lives matter more than monuments. Buildings can be rebuilt. Art can be recreated. But every person you save carries your culture forward in ways no museum ever could. The safe zones have fabrication facilities, genetic archives for your agricultural species, educational databases containing the sum of Council knowledge. You won't live in luxury, but you'll live. And maybe if we succeed in containing this, you'll have a future to rebuild in. A junior officer appeared beside Cooper, a woman with dark hair and commander's insignia. Sir, the others are accelerating manifestation across sectors 12 through 47. They've detected our signal and they're responding. Good, Cooper said, and there was something almost predatory in his smile. Let them come. All fleet elements proceed to phase line Alpha. It's time to show these things what happens when they threaten species under human protection. He turned back to address the Council directly. If you encounter humans during your evacuation, follow their instructions without question or debate. Our personnel have trained for this scenario since before most of you were born. They know the protocols, understand the dangers, and can recognize early signs of manifestation that your people won't notice until it's too late. Trust them with your lives because that's exactly what they're offering. The tactical display showed human ships taking up positions in elaborate defensive formations. Their hulls glowed with energy signatures Melissa had never seen before, weapons charging with power that made spacetime itself ripple and distort. To all Council species, Cooper concluded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, humanity extends its protection one final time. Not because you deserve it after your choices, but because you need it, and because innocent civilians shouldn't pay for their leaders' failures. We believe every sapient life has inherent value, even when those lives are led by beings who make catastrophically poor decisions. He stood at attention, and every human visible in the command center behind him did the same, a gesture of respect and commitment. Make for the safe zones with all speed. Follow the navigation data we're transmitting. Save your people. And maybe when this is over and you've rebuilt, you'll remember this lesson. May you reach safety swiftly. Cooper out. The transmission ended, but data continued flooding Council systems. Detailed navigational routes to each safe zone, optimized for different species propulsion technologies. Emergency protocols for recognizing and responding to manifestation events. Technical specifications for temporary barrier reinforcements that might buy precious minutes if the others caught up to refugee convoys. And embedded throughout it all, positions of human escort fleets ready to protect evacuating civilians. Melissa stared at the data streaming across her display, understanding dawning with crushing clarity. They planned for everything. Every possible contingency, every species-specific needs, optimal routes for different ship types. This isn't improvised response. This is the culmination of decades of preparation. They never gave up on us, Torin whispered, his voice thick with emotion. We expelled them from the council, rejected their warnings, called them cowards and paranoid fools. And they still prepared to save us. Velos activated the council-wide emergency broadcast, his voice carrying to every member world simultaneously. This is Chairman Velos with a mandatory evacuation order for all council species and territories. Proceed immediately to the coordinates being transmitted by human forces. This is not a drill. This is not political theater. This is survival. Leave behind everything except what you can carry. Your lives and the lives of your families depend on moving now. Across council space, billions of beings began the desperate journey toward salvation. Ships of every size and configuration lifted from countless worlds, forming vast convoys that stretched across light years. They left behind cities and monuments, treasures and heirlooms, everything that couldn't fit in their cargo holds. Behind them, the others manifested in growing numbers, reality itself seeming to tear and bleed as they pushed through from their dimension into normal space. Entire sectors became hazardous zones where the laws of physics grew unreliable and consciousness itself became dangerous. And at the boundaries of the safe zones, human warships took position, their weapons glowing with barely contained power, ready to pay whatever price was necessary to give the council species one more chance at survival. The 72-hour countdown had begun, and humanity stood ready to hold the line against the impossible. The exodus was chaos painted across the canvas of space itself. Millions of ships from hundreds of species fled toward the safe zones in desperate streams of light, creating traffic patterns that would have taken months to coordinate under normal circumstances. But Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Hayes had learned long ago that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or weapons, it was the ability to bring order to chaos when lives depended on it. She stood on the bridge of the human destroyer Vigilant, watching refugee convoys stream past her position through the viewscreen. Her crew had been guiding panicked civilian captains through safe corridors for 8 hours straight, and nobody had complained once. This was what they trained for, what they had prepared for during countless drills that most of them hoped would never be necessary. Valkyrie transport reporting engine failure, her communications officer called out. They're falling behind the main convoy, falling into a sector where manifestation activity is increasing. Rebecca didn't hesitate. Dispatch rescue tugs immediately. Get magnetic clamps attached and drag them if necessary. I want them moving again in under 3 minutes. Through the viewscreen she could see the others now. They had manifested fully in the regions behind the refugee fleet, and looking at them made her eyes water and her head pound. They were shapes that shouldn't exist, geometries that occupied too many dimensions at once, things that made her brain try to interpret impossible angles and fail in ways that felt like physical pain. Ships that strayed too close simply stopped. Their engines would still be running, their systems still functional, but the crews would walk calmly to the airlocks and step into space, joining the growing chorus of the converted. Rebecca had already watched it happen twice, and each time it felt like a knife in her gut. But she couldn't save everyone, only those who stayed in the safe corridors humanity had mapped out. Status report, she ordered, pushing emotion aside to focus on the mission. Approximately 4,000 ships still in transit across all sectors, her tactical officer reported. Current loss rate holding at 2.4%. That's actually better than our worst-case projections. Better than projected meant they had only lost hundreds of ships instead of thousands. Rebecca tried not to think about the faces behind those numbers, the families that would never reach safety, the children who had trusted their parents to keep them safe. Math was easier than grief right now. Commander, we're receiving reports from the defensive perimeter, her communications officer said, tension creeping into his voice. Admiral Cooper's battle group is engaging heavy manifestations at Junction Point 7. Rebecca pulled up the tactical display, and what she saw made her breath catch. The Admiral's flagship Defiant, along with 19 other human warships, was holding back a manifestation cluster that should have required 50 vessels to contain. The others were pressing hard at that junction, throwing everything they had at the weakest point in humanity's defensive line. Send them reinforcements, Rebecca began. Negative. Admiral Cooper's voice came through directly on her command channel, and she could hear the strain beneath his calm tone. All units maintain current positions. Your job is protecting the evacuation routes, not combat engagement. We knew what we were signing up for when we took this position. Rebecca watched through the tactical feed as the Defiant fired weapons that made reality itself recoil. These weren't missiles or lasers or any conventional armament. They were reality anchors weaponized, projecting fields of stabilized spacetime that pushed back against the other's intrusion into normal dimensions. The effect was like watching fire drive back shadows, except the shadows fought back with shapes that made physics cry in protest. "Sir, your shield strength is down to 38%, Rebecca reported, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "We'll hold," Cooper said simply, and there was absolute certainty in those two words. "We always hold. That's what humanity does. That's what we've always done even when nobody was watching." At Safe Zone Gamma, Melissa Harper stood in the massive arrivals center watching ships dock in an endless succession. The facility was extraordinary, a testament to human planning and determination. It was an orbital station kilometers across, with docking capacity for thousands of vessels simultaneously and life support systems capable of sustaining billions of refugees from dozens of different species. Chairman Velos descended from his shuttle looking diminished without his ceremonial robes and official retinue. He approached Melissa with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Genuine humility mixed with crushing shame. "Your people are dying out there," he said quietly. "Dying to save us after everything we did." "Our people," Melissa corrected gently, gesturing to herself. "I'm not human by birth, but I was raised by humans. I learned their values, their way of thinking. And yes, they're dying. Because that's what humans do when someone needs protecting. They stand between the innocent and the darkness, regardless of the cost." Admiral Cooper's voice suddenly echoed through the arrival center, his image appearing on every screen throughout the facility. He was still in his combat uniform, still on the bridge of the Defiant, but he had taken a moment to address the refugees directly. "You need to understand what happens next," Cooper said without preamble. "Because what you're about to see will define the relationship between humanity and the Council species for generations to come." The massive view screen showed the human defensive perimeter in real time. Ships glowing with barely contained energy, their hulls inscribed with symbols that predated any known civilization. Melissa recognized them from the deepest human archives, protections and wards that humanity had learned from an earlier encounter with dimensional threats, knowledge bought with blood and tragedy. 51 years ago, Cooper explained, humanity's first deep space colony encountered the others. We lost 15,000 people before we even understood what we were fighting. Another 30,000 died learning how to stop them. The survivors became humanity's dimensional defense corps, and we've been preparing for the others' return ever since. The screen showed historical images of human colonies surrounded by the same reality anchor technology now protecting the safe zones. Ships on eternal patrol, personnel maintaining barriers that kept the Council species safe without them ever knowing the danger existed. "We tried to share this knowledge," Cooper continued, and there was sadness in his voice now. "We tried to warn you, to prepare you, to include you in the defense of civilized space. But warnings without belief are just noise. So we bore this burden alone, losing ships and personnel year after year, maintaining quarantine zones you thought were just human paranoia." Melissa noticed movement on the tactical display. The others were concentrating their forces at Junction Point 7, throwing massive numbers of manifestations at the human defensive line. They were trying to break through, to reach the refugees clustered in the safe zones beyond. Then space behind the human fleet rippled, and something emerged that made every being in the arrival center gasp in unison. A single vessel appeared, dwarfing even the largest dreadnoughts in the human fleet. It had to be 20 kilometers long, its design clearly human but its scale suggesting construction that had taken decades. Along its hull, reality anchors the size of capital ships blazed with power that made the viewscreen shimmer with barely contained energy. "The Bastion," Cooper announced, and there was pride in his voice now. "Humanity's answer to extinction-level dimensional threats. 51 years in construction, built in secret using resources we diverted from civilian development. Powered by a controlled singularity and equipped with the most powerful reality stabilization array ever created." The Bastion moved into position at Junction Point 7, and when its weapons fired, reality itself seemed to scream. The others recoiled, their manifestations fragmenting and dissipating like shadows before impossibly bright light. Space around the junction point stabilized, the tears in dimensional barriers sealing as the Bastion systems flooded the region with reinforced spacetime. "Will it stop them?" Velos asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cooper heard the question through an open channel. "It will contain them. Push them back. Give us time to permanently seal the barriers. But it requires constant human oversight to operate, and if necessary, there's a final protocol that requires human crews to make a sacrifice I hope we never need to invoke. Rebecca's voice came through from the Vigilant. All refugee ships have cleared the defensive perimeter. Evacuation is complete. Then it's time, Cooper said. All fleet elements, begin controlled withdrawal to secondary defensive positions. We're contracting the perimeter to something we can hold indefinitely. Over the following hours, the human fleet executed a tactical withdrawal that military historians would study for generations. They gave ground slowly, grudgingly, each retreat covered by devastating applications of reality-stabilizing weapons. The others pressed forward eagerly, but their advance slowed and then stopped at the boundaries of the safe zones. There, humanity established a permanent defensive line. Ships rotated in and out of patrol positions, crews working in shifts to maintain constant vigilance. The Bastion anchored the defense at the most critical junction, its massive bulk a promise that the others would advance no further. Weeks passed and the defensive line held. The manifestations tested it constantly, probing for weaknesses that never appeared. Behind the human fleet, the Council species worked together to build new lives in the safe zones. Valkyrie engineers collaborated with Drakner architects. Thronix scientists shared research with Prian medical specialists. Species that had barely spoken to each other for centuries now worked side by side, united by shared survival. Melissa stood on an observation deck overlooking the main habitation ring of Safe Zone Gamma, watching construction crews from a dozen species build homes and schools and parks that hadn't existed a month ago. Children of different species played together in recreational areas, their parents nearby, grateful to be alive. Chairman Velos joined her, looking older but somehow more genuine than he had in the council chambers. "It's not what we had," he said quietly. "No," Melissa agreed. "But it's real. It's earned. And it's worth protecting." Admiral Cooper appeared beside them, having finally left his command post for the first time in weeks. He looked exhausted but satisfied, like a man who had completed a mission he had prepared his entire life to undertake. "The barriers are stabilizing," he reported. "The Bastion and the fleet can maintain this perimeter indefinitely. You're safe here, all of you." Ambassador Torin approached with several other former council members, each carrying the weight of their past mistakes visibly. "At what cost to humanity?" Torin asked. 1,200 ships on permanent patrol. 70,000 personnel on rotation. Resources that could build colonies or fund research or improve lives. Cooper shrugged as if the answer was obvious. "A cost we consider acceptable. Because someone has to stand watch. Because we remember what it cost to learn these lessons alone, and we wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. And because we hope that someday you'll stand with us." "Why?" Velos had to ask. "After everything we did, everything we said, all the warnings we ignored. Why do you still protect us?" Cooper looked out at the habitation rings, at species learning to coexist under humanity's protection, at children who would grow up never knowing how close they came to extinction. "Because we believe every sapient life has value. Because we've seen what the others do to civilizations that face them alone. And because we hope that when you've rebuilt, when you've remembered this lesson, you'll stand beside us as true partners. Not behind us seeking protection but with us sharing the burden of keeping civilization safe." He extended his hand to Velos in the human gesture of partnership and mutual respect. The old council failed because it was built on politics and pride. Maybe something better can rise from these ashes. Something built on trust earned through shared sacrifice, on relationships forged in genuine crisis, on the understanding that the universe is dangerous and vigilance is the price of survival. Velos clasped Cooper's hand firmly. "We will remember. We will learn. And when you need us, we will stand with you. This I promise not as chairman of a council that no longer exists, but as someone who has learned what true leadership looks like." In the distance, human warships continued their eternal patrol, their engines burning bright against the darkness. They held the line at the boundaries of reality itself, keeping the others at bay with weapons and technology born from tragedy, maintained by sacrifice, powered by determination that refused to let innocents suffer. The flames of human ships illuminated the safe zones like artificial stars, a promise that as long as humanity stood watch, the darkness would not prevail. And within those zones, the species of the former Galactic Council were learning the hardest lesson of all. That survival sometimes depends on trusting those you once dismissed, that pride is a luxury the universe rarely permits, and that true strength lies not in refusing help but in accepting it with grace and promising to stand with your protectors when they need you in return. The warning had come. The flames had burned. And from the ashes, something new and better was beginning to grow, built on foundations of shared survival and mutual respect that no political maneuvering could ever shake.